Crowdsourcing means or is?
Yes.
Can anyone guess? Can someone remind me what it is?
Did you say Kickstarter?
Crowdfunding.
That's crowdfunding. All right, I'm glad I asked. No, all right, so crowdsourcing is more like Upwork or like Amazon Mechanical Turk or these platforms that basically it's like an online labor platform. And I'm going to use the term online labor platform because that's more material than this marketing term, crowdsourcing. So my name is Zach Sedefian. I'm a master's student of political science at Brooklyn College, where I research labor in the context of the global political economy. I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to talk about crowdsourcing or online labor platforms in the context of economic imperialism. So also that the previous presentation was a perfect theoretical context for what I'm about to talk about. So the current phase of global capitalism, like those before it, rests on the appropriation of value from the global south, or what we call in dependency theory terms, the periphery. But unlike traditional imperialism, the neo-imperialist phase that we're currently in doesn't attempt to bribe the working class of the imperial core. There are no new welfare states or social democratic bargains. In fact, we see every day how precarious life has actually become, with last week 40 million Americans going to sleep without knowing if they would receive food stamp benefits. Instead, states choose to impose austerity while multinational firms use global wage competition to drag down labor conditions everywhere. In the 21st century, online labor platforms, or I might just say OLPs for brevity, they've become a means of reorganizing global labor relations. So OLPs are web applications that connect clients with digital workers from around the world, primarily to replace high-cost labor in the core. From so-called microtask platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk and Cloudflower to specialized service sites like Freelancer and Upwork, OLPs enable core-based firms to hire work of any skill level from a global labor pool. And to clarify, when I'm talking about online labor platforms, I'm not talking about location-based gig work apps like Uber or DoorDash, since they entail like a physical interaction between clients and workers. So online labor platforms that go by many names, including the crowdsourcing term that I used. You might have heard them called the sharing economy, platform economy, gig economy, on-demand economy, online freelancing, microtasking, or even cloud labor, which is probably the worst one. But whatever label we use, the dynamics of these online labor platforms have serious consequences for how global labor is being reorganized. But I don't see any indication that these developments represent a fundamental break in the logic of capitalism or imperialism. There's no need, in my view, to theorize about an emergent techno-feudalism, neo-feudalism, or even platform capitalism. Online labor platforms fit perfectly within existing capitalist imperialist logic. And to truly understand what they're doing to workers, both in the imperial core and the periphery, we need to analyze them through a historical lens. After all, every form of capitalism depends on what Marx called primitive accumulation, or in other words, the direct plunder of resources from the pre- or non-capitalist periphery. And every form of capitalism creates highly precarious and highly exploited labor relations. So these are nothing new, and neither are the rentier tendencies described by Yanis Varoufakis as part of his techno-feudalism thesis. And neither is there anything new about workers using their own consumer goods as productive resources, as Jody Dean theorizes in her work on neo-feudalism. In fact, even Marx wrote in the Grundrisse that a house is either productive or consumptive because it provides the social reproductive means for the worker. So only by looking historically, rather than theorizing about some emergent future, can we understand the global political economy. That's why I draw on the frameworks of unequal exchange and dependency theory as developed by Arguri Emanuel, Samir Amin, Rui Marini, Andre Gunder Frank, and many others to make sense of what's happening today. This screen right here, basically, if you sign up as a worker for Amazon Mechanical Turk, this is the interface that you see. It's basically just a list of HITs, human intelligence tasks, that pay 40 cents or $7.50. And I did a couple of these. Basically, it was showing me a picture of like a print, what's it called, like a paint roller, and it says, is this picture described with the words paint roller? So it's like very like low-level tasks like that. So that's why it's called like microtasking. So workers on these platforms, they're classified as independent contractors instead of employees. So in practice, this means they compete for jobs by bidding on these algorithmically managed listings. Their productivity and work quality is also constantly tracked by algorithms and software, and that data ends up determining who gets more work, who gets paid for what they've completed, and who actually just gets kicked off the platform entirely. And even in the imperial core, these workers make poverty wages. One study found that US-based OLP workers earned an average of just $4 an hour, while their Indian counterparts earned about $1.20. Another study found that generally, on average, OLP workers earn 70% less than traditional employees of the same skill. Now, as unequal as this sounds, that wage gap is actually a significant decrease compared to what the global wage gap is. Jason Hickel and his collaborators, or comrades, that's fine too, found that workers in the periphery are actually paid between 87 and 95% less than equally skilled workers in the core or in the north. So multinational corporations obviously can profit immensely from that arrangement, and they outsource labor to the periphery while paying only a fraction of the cost of what they would pay in the core. This massive wage gap is not only clearly unfair, but it's what Argyri Emanuel identified as the central mechanism that sustains global inequalities. So Argyri Emanuel, he was a Greek-born Marxist economist who once served as an advisor to Patrice Lumumba's government, helping develop a program for post-colonial Congo. Shortly after the CIA-backed assassination of Lumumba in 1961, Emanuel would be deported to Nairobi, and from there would go to Paris, where he would, at the age of 50, enroll in a doctoral program to study socialist planning. He was writing at a time when the international solidarity of the working class, the kind Marx and Engels envisioned in the Manifesto of the Communist Party, seemed no closer to becoming a reality. The brief wave of decolonization was in the process of being extinguished by imperialist powers. To Emanuel, as to Hobson and Lenin before him, the relationships between imperial and peripheral countries had come to mirror class relations. But unlike Lenin, Emanuel argued in his 1972 work, Unequal Exchange, a study of the imperialism of trade, that this divide wasn't primarily about monopoly power or organic capital concentration, but it was about wages and wage differentials. Workers in the periphery earning far less than those in the core meant that the commodities they produced were systematically undervalued in international trade. So the core would capture most of the value, and that's what he called unequal exchange. Or he was very specific. He said that this is narrow or strict unequal exchange, and broad unequal exchange includes the kind of monopoly relation that I discussed briefly. So in theory, Emanuel's analysis suggests that this imbalance could be corrected if peripheral workers migrated en masse to the core to seek higher wages, right, in theory. But in practice, obviously, this is unrealistic. As he would later write in his 1975 work, Revisiting Unequal Exchange, migrant workers in imperial core countries often face internal wage discrimination based on ethnic factors, which effectively blocks the theoretical wage equalization. But even setting discrimination aside, the physical constraints on migration make the theoretical solution untenable. Countries today are encircled by militarized, securitized borders, restrictive visa systems, and selective immigration lotteries. According to the International Labor Organization, the migrant labor force is only about 164 million people worldwide, and roughly 70% of them migrate to core countries. Meanwhile, many peripheral countries still continue to face high unemployment rates, especially among working-age men, or otherwise said, the people that could migrate. So in theory, this means the number of potential migrant workers is actually much higher than what we see, than the 164 million. But in an era of the digital economy, these online labor platforms virtualize this problem because they remove spatial and temporal distance that separates capital from the labor force. So multinational corporations based in the core can access a global reserve army of labor that is cheap, abundant, and highly precarious, all central features that Marx identified as necessary for the expansion of capital accumulation. So World Bank estimate places the number of global online platform workers between 150 and 350 million. About 75% of them hold university degrees, making platforms ideal channels for outsourcing high-skilled work. Data from the Oxford Online Labor Institute shows that a majority of these workers now hail from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which together account for half of all online labor platform workers. India's share alone grew from 1/4 in 2017 to 1/3 in 2021. Given that almost half of all internet content is in English, it's not surprising that the highest labor export comes from countries with British imperial legacies. On the other hand, the share of US and UK workers participating in OLPs dropped from around 10% to less than 4% each in that same period. Meanwhile, around 3/4 of all client demand, the people actually contracting labor, continues to come from core countries. So in demographic and wage data alone, we can detect outsourcing trends. Furthermore, the service sector now accounts for 3/4 of all economic activity in OECD countries. Within them, the demand for high-skilled labor continues to grow. For instance, the number of highly skilled migrant workers from Mexico to the United States nearly doubled between 2005 and 2011, and actually doubled in the 5-year period before that as well. So my preliminary findings are that online labor platforms have emerged as a 21st century virtual fix for high-wage service labor. When 20th century capitalism faced the same pressure of high wages in the manufacturing industry, it simply relocated manufacturing to the periphery, which is called a spatial fix. Later, neoliberal policies dispersed production into global commodity chains, which led to widespread deunionization and wage devaluation. Online labor platforms, however, offer a new 21st century solution. Instead of a spatial fix, as in the last century, they eliminate the need for both physical location and for physical labor migration, while opening vast potential for imperialist appropriation with uncertain consequences for workers. Besides operating as a form of unequal exchange through wage differentials, OLPs entrench the international division of labor in several other ways. We find a parallel to what Emmanuel Nest outlined in his 2023 work, Migration as Economic Imperialism. When highly skilled laborers from less developed countries migrate to core countries, they contribute indirectly to underdevelopment at home, because their skills are used, rather in their home countries, their skills are used to concentrate capital in the imperial core. So core countries benefit from not only the obvious way, but they also benefit from scientific and technological contributions from this high-skilled labor force. But so they benefit from the scientific and technological contributions of the high-skilled migrant labor. So in the Grundrisse of Marx referred to the scientific and technological knowledge as the general intellect, because it formed the foundation for society's productive capacities. When this technical knowledge is concentrated in the core, it thus becomes a powerful mechanism for generating extraordinary profits for monopoly capital. The transfer of this knowledge is facilitated by an imperial innovation system epitomized by places like Silicon Valley. Workers in technology firms often sign intellectual property agreements that give companies ownership of innovations, even those created outside work hours, which I actually personally signed one because I used to be a software engineer before I decided to do this. On a global scale, international organizations and imperialist governments like the United States enforce patent law regimes that claim control over global scientific and technological innovation. The World Intellectual Property Organization, for example, has expanded intellectual property rights through ad hoc legislation in the service of multinational firms. The WTO TRIPS agreement, or the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, operates in much the same way, with aggressive patent enforcement that punishes emerging markets for the slightest deviation. And both of these have been widely criticized by developing countries. These intellectual property regimes reproduce underdevelopment in the periphery because they transfer innovation of skilled workers from their home countries to the imperial core, thereby consolidating the core's domination in the global economy. This is particularly clear in online labor platforms. Around 3/4 of all platform work is classified as high skill, as I said before. And on top of that, the high-skilled platforms, like as I differentiated them from the microtask platforms, like I showed you the screen of, the high-skilled platforms account for 10 times the market share of the microtask platforms. So taken together, this suggests that the transfer of technical knowledge from the periphery is both systemic and massive. So what we see in online labor platforms are multiple forms of unequal exchange. The narrow kind described by Arrighi Emanuel, the concentration of organic capital as described by Samir Amin, and the appropriation of the general intellect as described by Raul Delgado Wise and several others. What remains to be explored are the ecological and material effects of the digital infrastructures that support OLPs. And I just have a couple of words on this. Because unlike in manufacturing and relocation, online labor platforms, they don't alone demand the expansion of like information and communication infrastructure in the periphery. That's kind of already there. So it doesn't have the same relation in that sense. It, like, you know, furthermore, like the workers on the online labor platforms, like I mentioned before, they're subject to algorithmic management. It's not like when the companies need to expand their labor force, they don't need to hire more managers. They basically just need to have a software engineer make a couple of clicks in like Amazon Web Services to make their server larger so they can handle more traffic. It's basically that simple. So, you know, of course, those data centers themselves, they have material and ecological implications, but they're expanding mostly in the imperial core. As we've seen in the news recently with people with them opening new AI data centers and whatnot, much to the dismay of local communities. And so this reinforces my initial comments about this current phase of capitalism not really seeking to satisfy the northern workers or the core workers in a pact with imperialism. Instead, it's kind of just, of course, there's unequal exploitation. Like we're clearly benefiting from our historical place in the core as workers, but the current phase is detrimental to the entire global working class. So in sum, we're witnessing a digital economy that is not a break from the logic of capitalist imperialism, but an extension of it into new domains, not the job creation opportunities that OLPs claim themselves to be. Instead, these platforms illustrate how capitalism is an extremely dynamic system, constantly transforming itself to maintain the subordination of most of the world's population. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Now, open to questions on, and let's try to address all.
I've got a quick question for Zach.
Yeah.
Could you give an example of like a high skill task?
Oh yeah, sorry, I think I forgot to, I wrote a note to say that and I forgot. So yeah, the most commonly online labor platform jobs are software engineering by a far margin. That's the top one. So it's kind of obvious, like the Bureau of Labor says that software engineers in the US make $65 an hour. So it's pretty obvious why that's the most targeted one for outsourcing, right? The other ones are accounting, translation, writing, graphic design, and general multimedia work. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
You want to call?
Oh, no, I was going to ask a
Yeah.
question. A question, kind of, I mean, first, I guess, about the theoretical differences that you have against, like, the techno-feudalism framework, teasing that out a little bit more, because I think that's interesting. I had found, like, Yanis Varoufakis's, framework helpful because of how it uses the superstructure, like understanding capitalism superstructure and understanding how this, like the control of that superstructure, how cloud capital fits into a larger category than how capitalist producers have previously interacted in the economy. And I think that why I find it helpful is that it's basically showing how it's mutating the social relations and the direction of social relations from a liberalizing position to a very consolidating position, which is the direction of capitalism, capitalist forces generally. And so I feel like it kind of links up where your presentation was talking about kind of this, how are we in fascism, or what is the difference between anti-authoritarianism versus like a Marxist perspective and fascism. And I think it's getting to this quality of like understanding how social relations are changing or like being embedded in or are in the future, like is there a material difference in how social relations are occurring? And so I guess my question is, do you feel like those talk to each other, like these presentations in a way? And like, maybe you can just sorry, it's like a long question, but could you give more information about your specific disagreements with the on-spectrum focus?
Yeah. Well, basically, as far as I understand what he's saying, it's that, he's basically talking about rentiers and land, like rents. Rents are a fundamental part of monopoly capitalism, monopoly capitalism. That's how financiers make their money, basically, just by sitting on money. So he's kind of talking about like the tech companies as if there's something unique. Like it's in my like theorizing, it's really a kind of non-material framework, because he's not seeing that the tech companies, they're just companies like that are propped up by finance capital again, and then the superstructure part. So that's kind of what I was mentioning with the precarious labor relations. Like I just had a sentence in there where I said like all capitalism engenders precarious labor relations. That's kind of what him and Jody Dean focus on the most. It's like, oh, well, we're now on these like online labor platforms where we're not employees anymore. We're just kind of like part of the precariat or the cloud labor or whatever. But that's what 90% of the world works as now. Where like capitalism engenders basically wage slavery. We don't really see that here because we're seeing more of the cracks of it now. But for most of the world, if you go and look like where people are working, it's way worse than what he's describing as a cloud serf. You know what I mean? So I see it as, to be completely honest, like I see it as a way for him to make a brand, and the whole neo-feudalism and techno-feudalism thing is like academic branding to kind of, draw attention and, create new things. I feel like looking at what, obviously there's place for new ideas, but what we have from the monopoly capitalist school, from Lenin and Emanuel and Samir Amin, I think it's really useful to understand what's happening here, because it gives a more global picture, whereas Varoufakis' thing, it's basically only valid for Silicon Valley, or if not that, it's only valid for the United States and the imperial core. I'd be curious what you...
I guess I'm not definitely wedded to his framework. I think it's interesting in, like, do you feel that basically the raw power, like the framework brings to the forefront power, which I think sometimes, like, that's what LP is trying to do, is to bring like the material aspects and the power conversation together. And in our current economy, like, are we linked to productive forces? Like, are these companies linked to productive forces? Almost like that is not where a majority of their capital is coming from. It's basically.
So you're saying like
like understanding that. I mean, I guess you believe, like, basically you're like, well, the framework of extractive labor is just that. How do you, in an AI world, where do you find the extractive labor that, say, it's like completely replaced? Like, does that make it harder to understand the concept of like what's going on?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I just see AI, the whole LLM thing, it's just all, it's a veneer. Like, it's not actually it's not actually doing anything. Like, basically, that screen that I showed you with Amazon Mechanical Turk, those are the people training the LLMs and saying if this is correct, if that's not. They're the ones like typing massive amounts of data into it. So all of these AI things, all of the LLMs and whatnot, they're trained on the massive labor of the global South. So the relation is still there. It's really not, it's really not going to replace that much. I don't see the LLMs as that useful. Like, you can't even put like 5 paragraphs into it and say rewrite this in a voice for a presentation, because it failed when I tried. Back to your point about the superstructure thing, just to kind of understand that more. So you're talking about like feudalism, like, so as far as I understand, feudalism was based on basically ideology. That's how they were able to keep it going. Not necessarily the productive and the material forces, but the ideology of saying like, oh, I'm a spokesman of God, so you got to give me part of your crop, basically. So is that what you're talking about? Like, the techno-feudalists are getting basically they're not actually owners over the productive forces,
So that
but
it solidifies a productive structure in which, and the ideology is what is the superstructure of that productive social relation. And that when you see when there was a breakage of that, you have capitalism rising out of the history of feudalism, which actually kept some of its qualities and was iterating. And now you see where are we in this moment of capitalism, feudalism, authoritarian, we're kind of seeing changing social relations in a meaningful way, and I'm trying to put it in an economic framework.
Okay.
So I don't want to monopolize time. So
Maybe.
I also wanted to, I don't know, for Zachary, no, I'm saying it wrong. Zachary.
no, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Either one's fine.
Okay. I was thinking that, obviously for workers in dependent countries, this is a good thing, right? That they are able to get these jobs. Otherwise, we would assume that they are probably either unemployed or getting paid even less.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the strategy there?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, because like I said, the wages are higher than their regular wage, right? That's why I kind of was talking about the scientific and technological transfer of the general intellect, because it's not just about the wages that will keep them, in a subordinate position. It's the whole relation between multinational firms headquartered in the core getting labor without any sort of input back into the country. So they're getting higher. These individual workers in the periphery, they're getting higher wages. Let's use an example, a specific example of somebody that I actually worked with off of Upwork, a guy in Nigeria who, if he worked at a local tech company, if one even existed, let's say, in his town, which probably didn't, because actually a lot of online labor platforms, their laborers come from mostly tertiary and secondary cities, not the capitals. But if he worked for a tech firm in Nigeria, he definitely wouldn't have been making because we paid him northern wages for the small amount of work that we had to be done. It was 3 days of work, and it was $1,000 or something. So I feel like it was a fair relation. He would obviously not get $1,000 from a Nigerian company. But the thing is, his skills are going towards my company, or this little startup thing that has died, but that's what I hired him for, his skills are not going towards building capital or building infrastructure or building more jobs in Nigeria. His skills are going towards building this company that me as a northern worker thought I wanted to start up because I didn't want to work anymore. I didn't want to work for a company anymore. Basically it enables northern workers to become little mini capitalists and kind of hire people like that to then make their own company that, again, like I said, concentrates capital here. So that's the main issue. It is great for the individual, and so is migration actually. When a Mexican high-skilled worker. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when a Mexican high-skilled worker, they come here to work for Facebook instead of Pedidos Ya or something. They're going to make a lot more money, have a lot more money for their family, and that's a good thing. But the thing is, their country gets stuck in an imperial relation, and that's the bigger issue, because the rest of the population they're having their conditions pushed down by the fact that they are able to kind of rise into the middle class, while the rest of the people are kind of left behind.
Yeah, but that's the rule for any skilled worker in the developed countries. Whether they come here to make more money or whether they sell their labor to an international company that happens to have, a physical location, or whether they sell it to an online company.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, I mean, dependency theory, right? You have, some core work. So first of all, some national elites benefiting from it, and those I think that are getting cut into this process, right? The national elites on the developed countries are cut from the process,
right.
Which is, in my opinion, a new thing, right? Because normally you need them somehow to exploit
Yes.
the workers in dependent countries.
Yeah.
But like for high-skilled workers, it's kind of the same. They're working for capitalists that have their core interests in the global north.
Okay.
So that's why I really agree with you when you say, well, this is not different than capitalism and the dependency relationship that we have since colonial times.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the difference is like high-skilled workers here, we benefit from like iPhones and MacBooks and stuff that aren't available for those workers in the global south. You know what I mean? Like that's what I mean by like organic capital and consumer goods and stuff. Like we have a lot better infrastructure here.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they are available for those high-skilled workers in underdeveloped countries. Yeah.
So it's almost
Well,
like
And
Not
even
the-
more now because they're getting paid like, in dollars.
Yeah, well, yes, for the individual though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I agree with. For the individual, yes, does, but the collective of that dependent country, they're still not benefiting from the thing. But you're saying, so what's the difference between a high-skilled laborer in the north? The difference is that the
I'm asking like what is the difference in structure that it's presenting, because when you presented, you said that it's the same thing, right? Like it's just a continuation. There's not like a break. And with that, I agree.
Yeah.
I just think it's like a new way to do this, basically the same thing.
Well, the difference is that there's an international division of labor that.
It has always existed.
Not always. It is historically based. I mean, since the imperial period of capitalism created that international division of labor. And so the decolonial period after World War II, there was a chance of that division, like, becoming more shallow. But it kind of, because of U.S. imperialism, essentially, that division actually grew deeper and the structural dependencies grew deeper. So it's really about international relations more than specific class relations, and seeing the kind of national relations as a form of class relations, basically. Because the entire core or northern workforce benefits from those relationships. Because we're the only ones with social democratic or welfare states or any sort of, like kickbacks from the government or whatnot, or from those multinational firms concentrated here.
So I'm Brazilian. The middle class in Brazil lives way better, if they're actually middle class, than the middle class here. What I'm trying to tell is that I don't know that this makes a structural difference. I think it's just the same way, the same exploitation. I think like the difference for me from what you're presenting is that what's being cut is really like the middle-sized firm, national firm, right? Like, for example, like when Ford went to Brazil, the exploitation was sort of the same. They exploited like highly educated workers from the country, and a whole bunch of like floor workers and factory workers. Okay. When you have like that relationship from this middle relationship, what doesn't exist anymore is maybe like having a few big companies profiting like from, taking a cut really from this development. But for the workers, I don't see the difference. So I don't know how to unite this work. What I'm trying to say is like, I don't know how to unite these workers, right? I feel like high-skilled workers in underdeveloped countries are, it's exactly what they want. So I don't know if that the response is going to come from them either. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that they're bought into the imperial relationship. They benefit from it, right? So that's why I focus on 90% of the world that, is, we could say low skilled or low wage or whatever, but that have no opportunities for education to get those high skilled jobs. I mean, a lot of the Brazilian or petty bourgeois or whatever, the middle class, they're coming from colonial relationships. Mostly European, white, like the actual like indigenous people of Brazil and you know everyone that experienced the other side of their colonialism, they're still in the same relationship. You know what I mean? So it's just like the firms can, you know, find groups of people high skilled groups of people in dependent countries to work for them, but ultimately it doesn't benefit the entire country. And Brazil is kind of a different. It's kind of in between.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
Yeah,
it's
it
like
is.
semi-peripheral. So it's a lot of the, like I said, like most of the labor comes from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Kenya. So yeah, they're kind of not in the same position, but. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was just like trying to think together. I find it fascinating. I think it's very important to discuss this new, all sorts of platform work.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
no, it's an important intervention you brought up, though.
Just to like my Brazilian counterpart, I'm trying to synthesize like Zach's presentation and your question, and again, I could be right off topic, but it seems to me that like as you stated earlier, that the relationship hasn't changed between the high skilled worker and the global north. It still exists as it did 100 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to me, as a person that comes from a developing country, that the relationship between that high-skilled worker and their own country changes significantly when you become part of like the labor force of the global north. Whereas, for example, my parents came to this country, worked, then went back to their country and sort of invested within their own community. It seems like today, with this digital economy that you were speaking about, Zach, that doesn't exist anymore. So it's almost, to me, it seems like there's a double extraction. There's an extraction of labor, and then there's a social extraction, which continues to create like not only the class divide that we have here, but also exponentially increases the class divide that we have in places like in South America. Because as you and I both know, that there's almost no middle class. At least in Colombia, from what I said, there's no middle class. There's the elite, and then there's everybody else. So when I think about that sort of digital worker, it seems like that relationship keeps getting further and further apart. But again, I could be wrong.
I think there's two parts here. Is that the online labor platforms stuff is one thing, but the high-skilled worker is another thing. Like most of the high-skilled workers that will migrate, they end up staying. Well, I don't know if it's most. I don't know the actual numbers, but a lot stay. And like that contributes to what you said. Basically, it's like a brain drain from the global south, and that's the issue. But the online labor platforms, they reproduce that because the high-skilled labor, like I said, like the work that they're doing is not going to benefit their country. It's going to benefit the core. So it reproduces it, and it's a bit different because yes, their money is being spent back in their home country. So that's maybe a positive development. I'm not really putting a value judgment on. I'm just trying to kind of say that it mirrors migration in a way, and in both the positives and the negatives. So yeah, I think you're right, but yeah, simply that, yeah.
And so take a break, and then we'll regroup for that.